The CEO mocked his maid. "I'll pay you 1 matters if you can speak Arabic." Her first words stunned him. Subscribe to the Maid Secret for more stories. Don't risk missing the next story. Follow, comment, and share. Let's begin. The Khalid mansion stood like an island of opulence in the exclusive Westlake Hills neighborhood of Austin, Texas. 5 acres of manicured lawns surrounded the contemporary glass and limestone structure that reflected both the Texas sun and the Middle Eastern architectural influences of its owner's heritage. Inside, spotless marble floors stretched through cavernous rooms filled with artwork and artifacts worth more than what most people earned in a lifetime. Every morning at precisely 5:30 a.m., Layla Bennett arrived through the service entrance. At 32, she moved with quiet efficiency through the mansion's halls, her movements practiced and deliberate. She was invisible, just as she had trained herself to be over the years, working in homes where her presence was expected but never acknowledged. "Morning, Layla," whispered Carlos, the groundskeeper, as they crossed paths in the kitchen. He was one of the few who bothered to use her name. "Good morning," she replied with a soft smile that never quite reached her eyes. Layla had been working at the Khalid mansion for 3 years now, hired shortly after Richard Khalid, the family patriarch, had suffered his first stroke. Back then, the house had a different energy, somber but respectful. The old man, despite his wealth and status, had always nodded acknowledgement when passing her in the hallway. But things had changed 6 months ago, when Richard died and his son Adam returned from Dubai to take over the family empire. Adam Khalid was 38, Harvard Business School graduate, and recently featured in Fortune's 40 Under 40 for transforming Khalid Industries from a regional real estate development company into a global technology and investment powerhouse valued at over $3 billion. His return to Austin had transformed the quiet mansion into a revolving door of business associates, potential investors, and social climbers. "He wants the East Wing prepared for guests tonight," Mrs. Winters, the house manager, informed Layla while checking items off her digital tablet. 8 people for dinner at 7, followed by drinks on the terrace. "Make sure the linens are the Egyptian cotton, not the regular ones." Layla nodded, mentally calculating the additional hours this would add to her day. "Will Mr. Khalid's wife be joining tonight?" she asked, remembering the delicate, unhappy woman who'd visited only twice since Adam's return. "Ex-wife," Mrs. Winters corrected with a tight smile. "And no, Ms. Chen remains in Singapore with their daughter." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "He's bringing Natalie Pearson tonight, so prepare the guest room accordingly." The implication was clear. Another evening, another woman who would likely be gone before breakfast. Layla kept her expression neutral as she continued her tasks, moving from room to room with practiced invisibility. By midday, Layla was preparing the formal dining room. When the mansion's atmosphere shifted, Adam Khalid had returned early. She could hear his voice echoing from the foyer, the confident tone of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Tell Stevens I need those projections recalculated. The Saudi group won't commit until they see better margins," he was saying into his phone as he strode through the living room, a tall figure in a tailored charcoal suit. "And make sure the contracts for the Austin project are ready for signing tonight. These people aren't flying in from New York to drink my scotch and admire the view." Layla kept her eyes down, continuing to polish the already gleaming silver as he passed through. But unlike his father, Adam didn't even pause to acknowledge the staff working around him. To him, they were as functional and unremarkable as the furniture. She was arranging flowers in the formal living room when she overheard voices from Adam's home office, the door left slightly ajar. "The Meyer account is confirmed, but there's still the issue with the zoning commission," said a male voice she recognized as Michael, Adam's executive assistant. "They'll come around," Adam replied dismissively. "Everyone has a price. What about the guests for tonight?" "All confirmed. Mr. Al-Faisal and his team will arrive from Houston at 6. Their translator canceled last minute, but they assured me they speak enough English for business discussions." Layla's hands slowed momentarily on the arrangement of white orchids. She knew the name Al Faisal, a prominent Saudi family with investments across Texas. "Damn it," Adam muttered. "Al Faisal's English is terrible, and his number two barely speaks at all. This is why I wanted their translator here. We could try to find a replacement in 4 hours, in Austin?" Adam's laugh was short and humorless. "Just make sure the contracts are simple enough that even they can understand what they're signing." As the conversation continued, Layla moved silently to the next room, her mind elsewhere. She recognized the casual disrespect in Adam's tone. She'd heard it countless times from wealthy employers discussing people they deemed beneath them. The afternoon progressed with the usual hustle of preparing for an important dinner. Additional staff arrived. Servers hired from an upscale catering company, a private chef who commandeered the kitchen, and security personnel who positioned themselves discreetly around the property. Layla was refreshing the guest bathrooms when she heard a commotion from downstairs. Curious, she made her way toward the grand staircase, staying close to the wall, invisible by habit. Adam stood in the center of the foyer, surrounded by his assistant and several staff members. His face was flushed with irritation. "What do you mean they're arriving early? The contracts aren't even finalized." He snapped at Michael. "Their plane landed ahead of schedule. They're on their way now. 20 minutes at most," Michael replied, his expression tense. "And you still haven't found anyone who speaks Arabic." Adam ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. "I've called every translation service in Austin. On this short notice, the earliest they could send someone is tomorrow morning." Adam cursed under his breath, then turned to Mrs. Winters. "Get everyone in position. We'll have to wing it and hope Al Faisal's English is better than the last time." As the group dispersed, Layla slipped back to her tasks, moving silently through the halls. She was arranging fresh towels in the guest bathroom when she heard voices in the adjacent bedroom. Mrs. Winters speaking with one of the newer housekeepers. "Never seen him this agitated," the younger woman was saying. "Mr. Khalid doesn't like complications," Mrs. Winters replied. "These Middle Eastern investors are crucial to his new tech venture. Can't they just use one of those translation apps for a multi-million-dollar negotiation?" "Hardly," Mrs. Winters sighed. "If only someone here spoke Arabic. My cousin works for the Andersons, and their housekeeper is Filipino, but speaks fluent Mandarin. Saved them during a business dinner with Chinese clients once." "What about Layla?" the young woman asked. "I heard her talking on her phone once. It wasn't English, but it sounded kind of Middle Eastern." Layla froze, towel in hand. "Layla." Mrs. Winters sounded surprised. "What language would she speak? She barely talks at all." "I don't know. She has that slight accent, though. I asked her once where she was from originally, and she just said North Africa before changing the subject." Their voices faded as they moved further into the bedroom. Layla exhaled slowly, her heart racing. She finished her task quickly and retreated to the service area where staff took breaks. 15 minutes later, the mansion came alive with the arrival of the Saudi delegation. From her position in the kitchen, Layla could hear the exchange of greetings, the forced joviality in Adam's voice as he welcomed his important guests. She was preparing to bring fresh water to the meeting room when Adam appeared suddenly in the kitchen doorway, his expression taut with tension. "You," he said, pointing directly at her. The kitchen fell silent, other staff members freezing in place. "Mrs. Winters says you might speak Arabic. Is that true?" All eyes turned to Layla. She felt her throat tighten, the weight of attention uncomfortable after years of cultivating invisibility. "I know some, sir," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible. Adam's eyes narrowed, assessing her as if seeing her for the first time. The plain black uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her eyes downcast in the practiced manner of someone trained to be unobtrusive. "Some?" he repeated skeptically. "What does that mean? Can you translate a business conversation or not?" Layla hesitated. "I understand classical and several dialects, sir. A flash of surprise crossed Adam's face before his expression hardened into something like calculation. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully," he said. "These Saudis are worth $50 million to my company." Their translator bailed, and they claimed to speak English, but half the time I can't understand what Al-Faisal is trying to say. His eyes locked with hers, intense and evaluating. "If you can really speak Arabic well enough to help smooth this deal, I'll make it worth your while." A murmur rippled through the kitchen staff. Adam seemed to register their presence for the first time, straightening his posture and adjusting his tie. "If you impress me," he continued, his voice louder now, taking on a performative quality for his audience, "I'll pay you $1 million. The statement hung in the air, absurd, mocking. Several staff members exchanged glances. This wasn't a genuine offer, but a demonstration of power, a wealthy man's idea of a joke. "Come on," Adam said with a smirk. "Show us what you've got. Say something in Arabic." The kitchen was silent. Even Mrs. Winters looked uncomfortable. Layla raised her eyes slowly, meeting Adam's gaze directly for perhaps the first time since she'd begun working in his home. Then she began to speak. The Arabic that flowed from her lips wasn't the halting phrases of someone with passing familiarity. It was the eloquent, nuanced language of scholars and poets, her pronunciation flawless, her cadence melodic. She quoted from Al-Mutanabi, the revered 10th century poet whose verses spoke of honor and humility. "You shall know the worth of yourself by the worth of your ambition. For one person considers himself a pebble, while another sees himself as precious as the stars." The mockery vanished from Adam's face, replaced by genuine shock. Because these weren't random words. They were the same verses his grandmother used to recite to him as a child before she passed away. The same dialect, the same rhythm, the same rare phrasing from the region his family had once called home. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Layla hesitated, conscious of the audience around them. "From my grandmother," she said softly. "She worked for a family with roots in the same region as yours, many years ago." Adam stared at her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Winters, have Ms." He paused, realizing he didn't know her last name. "Bennett," Mrs. Winters supplied. "Layla Bennett. Have Ms. Bennett change into something appropriate for dinner. She'll be joining us as our translator." His eyes never left Layla's face. "We'll discuss your compensation later." As he turned to leave, Layla caught a glimpse of something in his expression, not just surprise or calculation, but a flash of recognition that went deeper than words. In that moment, something shifted. The invisible woman had suddenly become visible, and neither of them was quite prepared for what that might mean. As the kitchen erupted into whispers, Layla remained still, the weight of her past, a past she had carefully kept buried, threatening to resurface in ways she had never anticipated, because the mansion she had been cleaning for 3 years held more connections to her own history than Adam Khalid could possibly imagine. And by midnight, nothing in either of their lives would be the same again. 30 minutes later, Layla stood in the guest bathroom, staring at her reflection. Mrs. Winters had hastily found her a simple black dress from the collection kept for female staff during formal events. It fit well enough, though the sleeves were slightly too short, revealing a thin silver bracelet she usually kept hidden beneath her uniform. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Mr. Khalid is asking for you," Mrs. Winters said, her voice betraying curiosity. "The Saudi delegation is already seated in the dining room." Layla nodded, smoothing her hands over the unfamiliar fabric. "I'm ready." The grand dining room glowed with warm lighting, highlighting the modern chandelier that hung like a constellation above the long table. 5 men in business suits looked up as she entered, their conversations pausing momentarily. Adam sat at the head of the table, flanked by Michael and a man Layla assumed was the lead investor. "Gentlemen," Adam said smoothly, rising to his feet, "this is Layla Bennett, who will be assisting with translation this evening. She felt their appraising glances, confusion from some, dismissal from others. The oldest man, seated to Adam's right, studied her with particular interest. "Miss Bennet, please sit here." Adam indicated an empty chair that had been added between himself and the older man. As she took her seat, he leaned closer. "That's Faisal al-Faisal," he murmured. "The others are his advisors and legal team." Dinner proceeded with the practiced choreography of high-stakes business meals. Servers appeared and disappeared silently, presenting courses of expertly prepared cuisine. Wine flowed freely, though the Saudi guests opted for sparkling water. Initially, the conversation remained in English, cautious, formal exchanges about the weather, Austin's growth, and generic business climate observations. Layla sat quietly, observing the dynamics at play. "Mr. Khalid," Faisal finally said, his English heavily accented but clear, "your proposal is ambitious, very ambitious." "The tech sector in the Gulf is expanding rapidly," Adam replied. "Our platform would be the first to integrate financial services with the specific requirements of Islamic banking on a blockchain foundation." Faisal nodded politely, then turned to his advisors and spoke rapidly in Arabic. Layla listened carefully, catching the concerns they weren't expressing in English. Doubts about market penetration, questions about Adam's understanding of regional nuances. "Is there a problem?" Adam asked, noticing their extended exchange. Faisal smiled diplomatically. "No problem. We discussed some technical points." Adam glanced at Layla expectantly. She hesitated, then leaned toward him. "They're concerned about the platform's compliance with Sharia banking principles," she explained quietly. The second advisor mentioned that previous Western attempts have failed because they treated these requirements as superficial additions rather than foundational elements. Adam's eyebrows rose slightly. He turned back to Faisal with a new approach. "Mr. Al-Faisal, perhaps we should address your concerns about Sharia compliance directly. Our development team has worked closely with experts in Islamic banking to ensure the platform's core architecture reflects these principles, not just its interface." Faisal's expression shifted to one of surprise, then approval. He responded in Arabic, a lengthy explanation that his translator delivered concisely. "He appreciates your understanding," Layla translated. "He says many Western companies treat Islamic banking as merely avoiding interest, without understanding the deeper ethical frameworks around risk-sharing and asset-backed transactions." The dynamic of the dinner transformed. For the next hour, Layla bridged not just language, but cultural gaps, carefully translating nuanced concerns and explaining implied meanings that transcended literal words. She caught subtle jokes that would have been lost, clarified technical terms that had no direct English equivalents, and conveyed the emotional weight behind formal business language. As dessert was served, Faisal addressed her directly in Arabic, his tone respectful. "He's asking where you learned to speak with such classical precision," Adam prompted after she didn't immediately translate. "My grandmother taught me," she replied in Arabic to Faisal, then added in English for Adam's benefit, "I told him it was a family tradition." Faisal smiled warmly, then said something that made his advisors laugh appreciatively. "What did he say?" Adam asked. Layla hesitated. "He said you must be a wiser man than he initially thought, to have such a knowledgeable person working closely with you." Adam's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the diplomatic adjustment in her translation. But he smiled and raised his glass toward Faisal. "To wisdom in all its forms." As coffee was served, the conversation shifted to specific contract terms. Michael distributed tablets containing the agreement, and Layla found herself translating complex financial and technical language with surprising ease. "Ask them about the implementation timeline," Adam directed her at one point. "We need to know if they can commit to a May launch." She conveyed the question, listening carefully to the animated discussion that followed among the Saudi team. "They can meet the May timeline," she translated, "but they're concerned about the payment structure. The second phase payment would fall during Ramadan, when their financial activities are limited. They're asking if you could adjust the schedule to accommodate this." Adam frowned. That pushes our cash flow projections into the next quarter. They're willing to increase the initial payment by 12% to compensate, she added, catching the offer that had been discussed among them but not explicitly translated. Adam's expression changed. 12% up front. Are you certain? Layla nodded confidently. The negotiation continued with new energy. By the time the meeting concluded nearly 3 hours later, both sides appeared genuinely satisfied with the terms, a rare outcome in such high-stakes deals. Faisal shook Adam's hand warmly, then turned to Layla with a respectful nod. "Your assistance has been invaluable," he said in English, before adding in Arabic, "Your grandmother would be proud of how you've preserved the language's beauty." After the delegation departed, the mansion fell into an unusual quiet. The catering staff had cleared the dining room, and most household employees had been dismissed for the night. Adam found Layla in the small staff office, where she had retreated to change back into her uniform. "Don't," he said, startling her. He was standing in the doorway, jacket removed, tie loosened. "We need to talk." She followed him to his private study, a room she had cleaned hundreds of times but never entered while he was present. The space reflected his personality, modern, minimalist, with strategic touches of heritage in the form of Middle Eastern art and artifacts displayed in illuminated cases. "Sit," he gestured toward a leather chair opposite his desk. Instead of taking his usual power position behind it, he chose the adjacent seat. That was unexpected. Layla remained silent, hands folded in her lap. "You didn't just translate tonight," Adam continued, studying her with new interest. "You negotiated. That 12% increase wasn't explicitly offered until you mentioned it." "They were discussing it among themselves," she explained. "It seemed relevant." "Relevant?" He laughed shortly. "It just added $4 million to our first phase funding." He leaned forward. "Who are you really?" The question hung between them. Layla's eyes drifted to a framed photograph on his desk, an older woman with kind eyes standing beside a much younger Adam. "My grandmother worked for a family in Marrakesh," she said finally. "The Khalids had a summer home there in the 1970s and 80s. Adam went very still. "My grandmother's family," he said quietly. Layla nodded. "My grandmother was Amina Nejem. She was the housekeeper for your grandmother Samira for nearly 20 years. Recognition flickered in Adam's eyes. "Amina, the woman who made the mint tea." He shook his head in disbelief. "My grandmother mentioned her in her letters. She said Amina was like family." "Not like family," Layla corrected gently. "Just staff. But your grandmother was kind. She taught my grandmother to read classical Arabic poetry, which she later taught me." Adam stared at her with new awareness. "So when you quoted Al-Mutanabi earlier, those were verses your grandmother taught mine, who taught them to me." The silence that followed was heavy with implications of privilege, of invisible lives running parallel to visible ones, of connections forgotten by some but preserved as precious heritage by others. Adam stood abruptly and walked to a cabinet, returning with 2 glasses and a decanter. "I believe I owe you a conversation that doesn't position you as my employee." He poured amber liquid into both glasses, offering one to her. "And an apology." Layla accepted the glass but didn't drink. "For what specifically?" "The mockery of offering $1 million, or 3 years of not knowing my name." Her directness seemed to startle him. For perhaps the first time in years, Adam Khalid found himself without a ready response. Adam's expression shifted from surprise to something more complex, a mixture of defensiveness and genuine discomfort. He set his untouched drink aside. "Both," he admitted finally, "and for the assumption that you wouldn't understand what was happening in that meeting." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with new eyes. "You're clearly educated. Why are you working as household staff?" Layla considered her response carefully. This conversation represented a dangerous crossing of boundaries that had kept her safely invisible for years. "Education doesn't guarantee opportunity," she replied, "especially for immigrants without connections or resources." "You're not just any immigrant," Adam countered. "Your Arabic is literary, classical. That's not something you pick up in casual conversation. My formal education was in comparative literature at the University of Rabat, she acknowledged. I came to America 8 years ago on a student visa to pursue a master's degree at UT Austin. Adam's expression registered genuine surprise and ended up cleaning houses. I ended up making practical choices, she corrected him, her voice level. My scholarship was discontinued after budget cuts during my second year. International students can't access most financial aid. I took housekeeping work because it paid immediately, had flexible hours, and allowed me to send money home to my family. She set her glass on the side table untouched. What began as temporary became permanent. My student visa expired. Immigration pathways narrowed. The agency that placed me with your father provided documentation that allowed me to stay employed. Understanding dawned in Adam's eyes. You're undocumented. The blunt assessment hung in the air between them. In just 7 hours, Layla had transformed from invisible to dangerously visible. I should return to my duties, she said, rising from her chair. Wait, Adam stood quickly. That's not a threat. Please sit. After a moment's hesitation, she returned to her seat. Tonight would have been a disaster without you, he continued. The Al Faisal deal is worth significantly more than just the initial investment. It opens doors throughout the Gulf that have been closed to Western tech companies. He reached for a leather portfolio on his desk and removed a silver pen. I made a ridiculous statement earlier about $1 million. It was inappropriate and demeaning. He began writing on a company letterhead. But I do believe in compensating value appropriately. He slid the paper across to her. It was a check for $50,000. This is separate from your regular salary, he explained. Consider it a consulting fee for tonight's work. Layla stared at the check without reaching for it. The amount represented more than she earned in 2 years. And if I continue working as your housekeeper tomorrow? She asked quietly. Do I return to being invisible? Adam flinched slightly at her directness. I deserve that, he acknowledged. But no. That's not what I'm proposing. He hesitated. Khalid Industries is expanding our Middle East operations. We need someone who understands both the language and the cultural nuances, someone who can catch the subtleties that our regular translators miss. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you an opportunity, he clarified. A position as cultural liaison for our international division. Salary, benefits, visa sponsorship. His eyes met hers. A path to legal status, if that's what you want. The offer hung between them, life-changing, unexpected, and complicated by the unequal power dynamics that defined their relationship. Why? She asked simply. Purely self-interest, Adam replied with surprising candor. You have skills my company needs. You understand nuances that could make or break our expansion plans. And, he added after a pause, there's the connection to my grandmother. Layla's eyes drifted again to the photograph on his desk. You were close to her. A shadow passed over Adam's face. She raised me after my mother died. My father was absent, even when physically present. He gestured to the framed photo. Samira was the moral center of our family. After she passed, my father became focused entirely on business expansion. And you followed his example, Layla observed. Adam didn't deny it. Successfully, he added with a hint of his usual confidence. At what cost? The question slipped out before she could reconsider. Instead of the defensive reaction she expected, Adam fell silent, his gaze drifting to the collection of antique books behind his desk, volumes of poetry and philosophy that seemed at odds with the ruthless businessman she had observed for 3 years. That's a question I've been avoiding, he admitted finally. His phone vibrated on the desk. He glanced at it briefly before silencing it. It's nearly midnight. You should take some time to consider my offer. As if on cue, the mansion's security system chimed softly, indicating someone at the gate. Adam checked the monitor on his desk. Natalie, he muttered, looking briefly uncomfortable. I forgot she was coming back after her event. Layla rose smoothly, professional boundaries reasserting themselves. I'll show myself out through the service entrance. No, Adam said quickly. "Use the front door. You're not on duty now." He hesitated. "Will you be here tomorrow?" "I'm scheduled for my regular shift at 5:30, she replied. "Take the morning off," he said. "Come at noon instead. As a consultant, not household staff." She nodded, suddenly exhausted by the evening's emotional demands. As she turned to leave, her gaze caught on a small framed object partially hidden on his bookshelf, a handwritten note in flowing Arabic script. Adam followed her gaze. "My grandmother's last letter," he explained. "I keep meaning to have it properly translated. My Arabic reading skills are limited." "It begins with a line from Rumi," Layla noted, recognizing the elegant calligraphy. "What you seek is seeking you." Something unreadable crossed Adam's face. "Perhaps that's true," he said quietly. The security system chimed again, more insistently. "Good night, Mr. Khalid," Layla said, retreating to the familiar comfort of formality. "Adam," he corrected. "If you're going to be a consultant, you should use my first name." She nodded once before slipping from the study, leaving him alone with the ghosts of his past and the unexpected complications of his present. The morning light filtered through Layla's modest apartment windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the previous evening's events with analytical precision. The check lay on her small kitchen table, still unsigned. Beside it sat her phone, displaying an email from Adam Khalid's executive assistant. "Ms. Bennett, per Mr. Khalid's request, please find attached a formal offer letter for the position of Cultural Liaison and Strategic Communications Specialist with Khalid Industries. The position includes comprehensive benefits and immigration assistance through our corporate counsel. Mr. Khalid has requested your presence at noon today to discuss next steps. Regards, Michael Chen, Chief of Staff, Office of the CEO." Layla sipped her coffee, weighing options and consequences with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned that every choice carried hidden costs. The position offered financial security and legal status, dreams she had reluctantly set aside years ago. Yet it also meant stepping into a world where she would be visible, accountable, and connected to her past in ways she had carefully avoided. Her phone rang, an unknown number with an international country code she recognized immediately. "Mama," she answered in Arabic. "Layla, Habibti," her mother's voice, warm and familiar despite the thousands of miles between them. "I received the money you sent. It's too much. Are you keeping enough for yourself?" "I'm fine, Mama," she assured her. "How is everyone?" "Your brother's oldest started school last week. Smart as his aunt, the teacher says." A pride radiated through her mother's voice. "When will you visit? It's been 3 years." "Soon, I hope," Layla replied, her eyes falling on the offer letter. "Things might be changing here." "Good changes?" Her mother's intuition detected the undercurrent in her voice. "I'm not sure yet." Layla hesitated. "Mama, do you remember the stories grandmother used to tell about working for the Khalid family in Marrakech?" A pause. "Of course. Samira Khalid was the kindest person your grandmother ever worked for." "Why do you ask?" "It's a long story," Layla said. "But I've been working in the home of her grandson, Adam Khalid." "Allah yarhamah," her mother murmured, invoking mercy for the deceased. "Samira saved our family when your grandfather fell ill. Did I never tell you? She paid for his treatment privately, then gave your grandmother a raise so she wouldn't feel like it was charity." Layla closed her eyes, absorbing this new piece of history. "You never told me. There was no reason to speak of it. The past is past." Her mother's practical nature asserted itself. "Does this Khalid grandson know who you are?" "He does now," Layla admitted. "And? Is he like his grandmother?" The question hung in the air, impossible to answer simply. "I'm not sure yet," Layla repeated. "He's offered me a position in his company." Her mother's sharp intake of breath was audible across continents. "This is good news, yes? A proper job with your education?" "Yes," Layla agreed cautiously, "but it's complicated." "Life is always complicated, Habibti. Simple is for children's stories." Her mother's voice softened. Your grandmother would say that Allah places us where we are needed, not always where we expect to be. After ending the call, Layla showered and dressed with unusual care, selecting a simple but professional black dress and the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her upon completing her undergraduate degree. As she fastened them, she studied her reflection. Not the invisible housekeeper of yesterday, but not quite the confident professional she was presenting herself as today. At precisely noon, she arrived at the Khalid mansion's main entrance, rather than the service door, a small but significant change that felt strangely transgressive after 3 years of routine. Michael Chen opened the door, his expression professionally neutral despite the obvious curiosity in his eyes. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Khalid is expecting you in the study." As she followed him through the main hall, Layla experienced the disorienting sensation of seeing familiar spaces from an entirely different perspective. Rooms she had cleaned hundreds of times looked different when approached as a guest rather than staff. Adam was standing by the window, engrossed in a phone call. He looked up as she entered, gesturing for her to take a seat while he concluded his conversation. Unlike the previous night, he was fully in CEO mode. Tailored suit, crisp white shirt, the confident posture of someone accustomed to power. "Yes, tell them we'll need the full presentation by Thursday," he said into the phone before ending the call. He turned to her with an expression that mixed professional courtesy with something more difficult to define. "You came." "I did," she acknowledged, "though I'm still considering your offer." "Fair enough." He gestured to a leather portfolio on the desk. "I've made a few adjustments to the initial proposal. The position would include quarterly travel to our offices in Dubai, Riyadh, and potentially Rabat if we move forward with the North African expansion." The mention of her hometown wasn't coincidental, Layla realized. He had done his research overnight. "I've also added a signing bonus," he continued, "enough to potentially bring your family for a visit if you'd like." "You researched me," Layla observed, her voice calm despite the violation of privacy this implied. Adam had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Basic due diligence. I'm offering you access to sensitive business information." "And what did your investigation reveal?" "That you graduated with honors from the University of Rabat, that you were halfway through a master's in comparative literature and translation studies at UT Austin when your funding was cut, that you have no criminal record in either country." He paused. "And that your visa expired 4 years ago." Layla maintained her composure, though her pulse quickened. "Thorough." "I need to know who I'm working with," Adam said unapologetically. "And do I get the same courtesy?" she countered. "Should I request a background report on Adam Khalid before accepting this position?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face before transforming into reluctant amusement. "What would you like to know?" "Why this sudden interest in your family's past?" She gestured toward the framed letter on the bookshelf. "You've had 3 years to ask about your grandmother's correspondence." The directness of her question seemed to catch him off guard. He considered for a moment before responding. "My grandmother raised me until I was 12, he began, his tone more personal than she had ever heard from him. "After she died, my father sent me to boarding school in Switzerland. When I returned for holidays, the Marrakesh house had been sold. Her personal effects, including her letters, were packed away." He walked to the bookshelf and carefully retrieved the framed letter. "My father died believing his company needed to become completely Americanized to succeed. He systematically removed every trace of our heritage from the business and largely from our lives." Adam's fingers traced the frame's edge. "I've spent the past decade building what he wanted, a global company with American values and methods. And now," Layla prompted when he fell silent. "Now I'm expanding into markets where that approach is failing," he admitted. The Al Faisal deal made that clear. They weren't just looking for technical expertise, they wanted cultural understanding. Layla studied him, trying to separate genuine reflection from strategic business thinking. "So my connection to your grandmother is convenient timing. I would call it fortuitous rather than convenient," he corrected. "But yes, the timing is remarkable." Before she could respond, Michael appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but the Dubai team is waiting on the conference call." Adam nodded. 5 minutes. He turned back to Layla. "I have meetings until 3. Would you be willing to stay? There's something I'd like to show you afterward." Curiosity won over caution. "I'll stay. You can use my grandmother's letters while you wait," he offered, gesturing to an antique wooden box on a side table she had dusted countless times without knowing its contents. "They're mostly in Arabic. I've only had parts translated." 3 hours later, Layla sat surrounded by decades of correspondence, letters exchanged between Samira Khalid and various family members, friends and associates across Morocco, Egypt and Saudi Arabia. The letters revealed a woman of remarkable compassion and wisdom, deeply connected to her cultural roots while embracing the opportunities of her husband's international business. Several letters mentioned Amina, Layla's grandmother, with genuine affection and respect. In one particularly moving passage, Samira wrote to her sister about young Adam. "Amina's patience with the boy is a blessing. When Richard is traveling, which is constant, Adam follows her around the kitchen learning to make bread. She teaches him our old sayings and songs. I worry sometimes that he is growing up between worlds, too American for Morocco, too Moroccan for his father's ambitions. But perhaps this is a strength rather than a weakness." The study door opened, and Adam entered, looking drained from his meetings. He paused, taking in the sight of letters carefully arranged across the table. "You've been busy," he observed. "Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman," Layla said quietly. "These aren't just family correspondence. They're a chronicle of cultural bridge building. She maintained connections across countries and social classes when that wasn't common." Adam approached, examining her organized stacks. "Can you read them all?" "Most. Some use dialectical expressions I'm less familiar with." She hesitated before adding, "She mentioned my grandmother often." "What did she say?" "That Amina was teaching you to make bread," Layla said with a small smile. "And traditional songs." A look of distant recognition crossed Adam's face. "I'd forgotten that." He sat across from her. "After my morning meetings, I had my assistant locate something in storage." He placed a small USB drive on the table. "This is footage from my father's old home movies. Would you watch it with me?" The request felt strangely intimate. Layla nodded. Adam connected the drive to a sleek television mounted on the wall. After a moment of static, grainy footage appeared. A summer day in what was clearly Morocco, judging by the architecture and landscape. The camera panned across a sun-drenched courtyard to a kitchen where a young boy, of perhaps 7 or 8, stood beside an older woman, their hands covered in flour. "That's you," Layla said softly. "And your grandmother," Adam confirmed, his expression intent on the silent footage. The woman on screen demonstrated how to knead dough with practiced movements. The boy attempted to mimic her, creating more mess than progress. She laughed, a silent laugh in the footage, and adjusted his technique with gentle hands. "I remember her laugh," Adam said, his voice distant with memory. It was warm, like everything about her. The footage shifted to another scene, an elegant dinner party where Samira Khalid, regal in traditional dress, presided over a table of international guests. In the background, serving staff moved efficiently, including a younger version of Layla's grandmother. "My father filmed these when he visited twice a year," Adam explained. "It was his way of being present while remaining absent." Layla watched the interactions captured decades ago. The easy grace of Samira, the formality of business associates, the careful movements of staff who were simultaneously essential and invisible. "Your grandmother created a bridge between worlds," she observed. "These guests seem comfortable despite their different backgrounds." Adam nodded slowly, a skill I've only recently realized the value of. He paused the video on a frame where young Adam sat beside his grandmother, clearly entranced by whatever story she was telling. "After she died, my father erased this part of our heritage. He believed success meant becoming fully Western. And you followed his example," Layla noted, not unkindly. "I did," Adam acknowledged, "very successfully by most metrics. But," But the Al Faisal meeting made something clear. We're hitting barriers in global markets that can't be overcome with just technical solutions or financial incentives. He turned to face her directly. What you did last night wasn't just translation. It was cultural interpretation. You caught nuances I would have missed entirely. Cultural competence isn't something you can simply hire, Layla pointed out. It's developed through lived experience. I know. Adam seemed uncharacteristically hesitant, which is why I'm proposing something more substantial than just a translator position. He retrieved a folder from his desk. This is the framework for a new division within Khalid Industries, a cultural advisory group focused on building authentic relationships in key regions, beginning with North Africa and the Middle East. He handed her the folder. I want you to build it. Layla's surprise must have shown on her face. You have the educational background, the cultural understanding, and now you've demonstrated the practical ability to navigate complex cross-cultural business situations, he continued. With proper support and resources, you could develop something my company desperately needs. You barely know me, she said carefully. Yesterday I was in visible staff. Today, you're offering me a division to run. Yesterday I was a different person, Adam replied with unexpected candor. Or perhaps I was finally reminded of who I used to be. He gestured to the frozen image of his childhood self. That boy understood things the businessman forgot. Layla opened the folder, scanning the detailed proposal. The position came with substantial authority, a generous compensation package, and resources to build a team. Why trust me with this? She asked directly. Beyond my performance last night and connection to your grandmother? Adam considered her question seriously. Because you've lived in multiple worlds and maintained your integrity in both. Because you understand what it means to be simultaneously essential and unseen. He paused. And because I think my grandmother would approve. The mention of Samira brought Layla's attention back to the letters spread across the table. There's something you should see, she said, selecting a particular envelope from the collection. Inside was a photograph she had discovered, Samira and Amina, standing together in a garden, their posture suggesting friendship rather than merely employer and employee. They look like equals, Adam observed, studying the image. In some ways, they were, Layla replied. According to these letters, they shared a love of poetry, music, and philosophical discussion, despite their different circumstances. She hesitated before adding, There's a letter here that mentions you specifically. It was written shortly before your grandmother died. Adam's expression tightened. What does it say? Layla located the letter in question, written in elegant Arabic script on pale blue stationery. It's addressed to her sister in Casablanca. She writes, My greatest concern is for Adam. Richard sees only the business in the boy's future, but I have watched him with Amina in the kitchen, learning our old ways with natural grace. There is a sensitivity in him that his father mistakes for weakness. I fear what will become of this gentle spirit in the world Richard envisions for him. Adam's face remained carefully composed, but Layla caught a flicker of emotion in his eyes. She continues, Layla went on, I have set aside funds with instructions for the boy's education, not just in business, as Richard insists, but in languages, literature, and our cultural heritage. Whether these wishes will be honored after I am gone, I cannot say, but I have planted seeds that may yet grow, even in foreign soil. A heavy silence fell between them. Those educational funds were redirected to business school, Adam said finally. My father considered literature and cultural studies impractical luxuries. And now? Layla asked quietly. Adam stood and walked to the window, his back to her as he gazed out at the manicured grounds of his Texas mansion, a world away from the Moroccan courtyard of his childhood. Now I run a billion-dollar company built precisely as my father envisioned, he said. The practical path proved profitable. At what cost? Layla asked for the second time in their acquaintance. This time, Adam turned to face her, his expression unguarded in a way she had never witnessed before. That's what I've been asking myself since last night, he admitted. When you spoke those verses from Al-Mutanabi in exactly the cadence my grandmother used, it was like hearing a voice I'd forced myself to forget. The admission hung in the air between them, a moment of unexpected vulnerability from a man who had built his reputation on projecting strength and certainty. I can't change the past decade of business decisions overnight, he continued, but I can begin building bridges I've neglected, starting with this new division. He gestured to the proposal in her hands. If you're willing. Layla closed the folder thoughtfully. I'll need complete autonomy to build an authentic program, not just a marketing exercise in cultural sensitivity. Agreed. Immigration support that's expedited but fully legal. Already in process, Adam confirmed. My attorneys began working on it this morning. And recognition of the contribution of people like our grandmothers, she added, not just as colorful background characters, but as essential knowledge keepers whose wisdom has tangible value. A genuine smile, perhaps the first she had ever seen from him, transformed Adam's face. I would expect nothing less, he said. Does this mean you accept? Layla thought of her mother's words earlier that morning. Allah places us where we are needed, not always where we expect to be. Yes, she said, I accept. 3 months later, the Austin headquarters of Khalid Industries had undergone subtle but significant changes. The formerly sterile conference room now featured tasteful artwork from Morocco, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Fresh flowers adorned the reception area in arrangements reminiscent of traditional Middle Eastern designs. But the most notable difference was in the newly established Cultural Advisory Group offices on the previously vacant 5th floor. Layla sat at her desk, reviewing applications for the 2 remaining positions on her growing team. She had already hired a Lebanese-American financial analyst specializing in Islamic banking principles and a Turkish-American marketing strategist with extensive experience in both Western and Middle Eastern markets. Now she needed language specialists who understood the nuances of regional dialects and cultural contexts. A knock at her door interrupted her concentration. Adam stood in the doorway, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him in the corporate environment. The past months had softened some of his sharper edges, though the focused intensity that had built his empire remained. The Al Faisal team just confirmed for next week's summit, he announced. They're bringing twice as many people as originally planned. Apparently word has spread about our new approach. Layla nodded, making a note on her tablet. I'll adjust the welcome reception accordingly. Samira is finalizing the menu to include regional specialties while respecting dietary preferences. Adam smiled at the mention of the Moroccan chef Layla had insisted on hiring, a woman coincidentally named after his grandmother. Every international visitor who's come through in the last month has commented on how authentic the experience feels, he observed, taking a seat across from her desk. Authenticity was the point, Layla reminded him, not performance. I know, he acknowledged, and it's working better than even I anticipated. The Qatar deal closed 3 weeks ahead of schedule, and the UAE expansion is already exceeding projections. Layla set aside her tablet. Is that why you're really here? To celebrate the financial metrics? Adam's expression turned more thoughtful. Actually, no. Michael reminded me that today marks exactly 3 months since you started in this position. He placed a small, wrapped package on her desk. It seemed worth acknowledging. Surprised, Layla carefully unwrapped the gift, a beautifully bound edition of Al-Mutanabi's collected works in Arabic with English translation. Open the cover, Adam suggested. Inside was an inscription in Arabic, written in a careful hand that showed considerable effort. To Layla, who reminded me that true worth lies not in what we possess, but in who we become. With gratitude, Adam. Your handwriting has improved, she noted, genuinely touched by the personal effort the gift represented. 3 months of lessons will do that, he replied, though my teacher is merciless in her standards. Layla smiled, thinking of the twice-weekly Arabic lessons she'd been giving him, sessions that had gradually evolved from formal instruction into wide-ranging conversations about literature, philosophy, and increasingly personal histories. "The board meeting is at 11, Adam continued, checking his watch. "Ready to present our quarterly results?" 3 months ago, the idea of presenting to Khalid Industries' formidable board of directors would have seemed impossible. Today, it was simply another aspect of her new reality. "I'm ready," she confirmed, gathering her materials. "Though I expect pushback from James and Victoria on the expanded budget for cultural immersion training." Adam's expression turned wry. "They're still adjusting to the idea that not everything valuable has an immediate ROI. Fortunately, in this case, it does," Layla replied. "The metrics from our pilot program are compelling. Employee retention is up 17% in departments that completed the training, and client satisfaction scores have increased across all international accounts." "Always prepared," Adam observed with approval. "That's why they're starting to listen." The boardroom fell silent as Layla concluded her presentation. 10 pairs of eyes, belonging to some of the most powerful executives and investors in the technology sector, studied her with expressions ranging from open admiration to carefully masked skepticism. "To summarize," she said, displaying the final slide, "the Cultural Advisory Group has facilitated a 23% increase in international contract values, reduced negotiation timelines by an average of 17 days, and established Khalid Industries as a preferred partner in 4 key emerging markets, all within our first quarter of operation." James Harrington, the silver-haired CFO who had initially been most resistant to the division's creation, cleared his throat. "The numbers are impressive, Ms. Bennett. I'll admit I had concerns about the substantial investment this initiative required, but the returns appear to justify the expenditure." "Thank you," Layla acknowledged. "Though I would emphasize that financial metrics are only one measure of success. The qualitative feedback from both our international partners and our own team members suggests we're building something more valuable than just improved profit margins. We're creating lasting relationships based on mutual respect and understanding." Victoria Chen, head of global operations, leaned forward. "That's admirable, but this is still a business. Can you speak to the sustainability of these results? Are we looking at a temporary advantage that competitors can easily replicate?" It was the question Layla had been expecting, the one that revealed the board's lingering doubt about whether cultural competence could truly be a long-term competitive advantage. "What we've built isn't a simple program that can be copied from an organizational chart," Layla replied confidently. "It's an integrated approach that requires authentic commitment at every level of the organization." She gestured to the data on screen. "Our competitors can hire translators and cultural consultants. Many already have, but they're treating cultural intelligence as an add-on service rather than a fundamental operating principle." Adam, who had been silent throughout her presentation, spoke up from the head of the table. 3 months ago, I told this board that we were hitting invisible barriers in our global expansion, barriers that couldn't be overcome with traditional business approaches. Ms. Bennett's division has proven that hypothesis correct, but more importantly, has demonstrated that the solution isn't just better translation or superficial cultural awareness training. It's a complete reimagining of how we engage with international markets. Layla noticed several board members nodding in agreement. Even the skeptics seemed to be considering the evidence before them. "I move to approve the expanded budget for the Cultural Advisory Group as presented," said Dr. Amara Okafor, the newest board member and former UN diplomat, "and to formally recognize Ms. Bennett's leadership in establishing what is clearly becoming a strategic advantage for this company." "Seconded," added Thomas Rivera, head of product development. The motion passed unanimously. As the board members filed out of the room, several stopped to congratulate Layla personally. James Harrington, who had been her most vocal critic 3 months earlier, lingered until they were nearly alone. My family emigrated from Ireland 3 generations ago, he said unexpectedly. My grandfather used to tell stories about how they changed their name, lost their accent, buried their traditions, all to appear properly American in business. He glanced at her presentation materials. What you're doing here, honoring heritage while building bridges, it's long overdue in corporate America. Well done. When the room had emptied except for Adam, Layla finally allowed herself a moment to absorb what had just happened. The board's approval represented not just professional validation, but a significant cultural shift within a company that had once prided itself on its thoroughly American approach. Congratulations, Adam said quietly, though I'm not surprised. No. Layla raised an eyebrow. 3 months ago, half of them thought I was a publicity stunt, the housekeeper turned executive who made for a good press release about diversity and inclusion. And now they understand you're the most valuable addition to our executive team in a decade, Adam replied. You've earned their respect, just as you earned mine. The sincerity in his voice caught her slightly off guard. Their working relationship had evolved considerably over the past months, but they still maintained certain professional boundaries that reflected their unusual history. The quarterly reports from Dubai came in this morning, Adam continued, changing the subject. Their team is requesting that you personally oversee the training for the Saudi expansion. That would mean at least 3 weeks on site, Layla noted, mentally reviewing her calendar. Probably closer to a month, Adam confirmed. But it's a good sign. They're not just implementing our technology, they want our approach to cross-cultural engagement as well. Layla considered the request. I'd need to postpone the Jordan project. Michael can handle the preliminary work there, Adam suggested. This Saudi opportunity takes priority. A notification appeared on Layla's tablet, her mother's weekly video call, scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. Go ahead, Adam said, noticing her glance at the screen. We can continue this discussion later. Dinner at Farah's? Farah's was the small Moroccan restaurant they had begun frequenting for business discussions that increasingly included personal conversations. The owner, an elderly woman from Fez, had taken a particular liking to them, often bringing special dishes not on the regular menu and sharing stories of her own immigration journey. 7 o'clock? Layla suggested. Adam nodded and left her to take her call in privacy. As the video connected, her mother's face appeared on screen, slightly pixelated, but radiantly happy. In the background, Layla could see the familiar living room of her childhood home in Rabat, now renovated thanks to the funds she had been able to send home. Habibti, her mother exclaimed. You look tired. Are you working too hard again? Just finished a big presentation, Layla replied in Arabic, smiling at her mother's perpetual concern. It went well. Of course it did, her mother said confidently. When do you not excel at what you attempt? Your father would have been so proud to see what you've become. The mention of her late father brought a familiar, bittersweet ache. I think of him often, Layla admitted, especially when I'm negotiating with difficult businessmen. He always said I inherited his stubborn determination. That you did? Her mother laughed. Now tell me, have you received the visa paperwork I sent? Your brother is already planning every detail of your visit. The children ask daily when their famous American aunt will arrive. The paperwork is being processed, Layla confirmed. If all goes well, I'll be home for Eid. And this boss of yours, he will allow such a long absence? Her mother's tone was light but carried an undercurrent of curiosity that had been increasingly evident in their conversations. Adam understands the importance of family, Layla replied carefully. In fact, he suggested I extend the trip to include a visit to the old Khalid family property in Marrakesh. It's been sold, but the new owners apparently maintained much of the original architecture. Adam, is it? Her mother observed with the shrewd perception that had always seen through Layla's careful composure. No longer Mr. Khalid. We work closely, Layla explained, feeling strangely defensive. It's normal to use first names. Of course. Of course. Her mother's knowing smile suggested she was drawing conclusions beyond the professional relationship Layla had described in their previous calls. And will this Adam be joining you on your visit to Morocco? It's a possibility, Layla admitted. There are business meetings in Casablanca that might align with my trip. Her mother's expression turned thoughtful. When you speak of him, your voice changes, Habibti. Mama, I'm just observing, her mother interrupted gently. You've built an impressive new life. It would be natural if that included more than just work. Layla sighed, knowing better than to attempt misdirection with the woman who had raised her. It's complicated, she said finally. Our history isn't typical. The best stories never are, her mother replied sagely. Remember what your grandmother always said. The most beautiful tapestries contain threads of many colors. Layla completed the familiar saying. I remember. Good. Her mother's expression softened. Now, tell me more about these business meetings in Casablanca, and perhaps why the CEO of a billion-dollar company might time his travel to coincide with your family visit. The Moroccan sunset painted the Marrakesh sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple as Layla stood in the courtyard of what had once been the Khalid family's summer home. The new owners, a French-Moroccan couple who had restored the historic riad with meticulous attention to detail, had graciously allowed her to visit when they learned of her connection to the property's history. It's smaller than I remembered, Adam observed quietly, standing beside her. He had arrived in Morocco 3 days after Layla, having completed crucial meetings in London before joining her for this pilgrimage to their shared past. Children always see things as larger, Layla replied, watching as he traced his fingers along the intricate tilework of the fountain, but they preserved the essential character. Adam nodded, his gaze traveling up to the second-floor gallery where carved wooden screens provided privacy while allowing the breeze to circulate. My grandmother's rooms were there, he said, pointing. She would sit by that window in the evenings, writing letters or reading poetry. Layla could see the emotions playing across his face, nostalgia, loss, and something like reconciliation. The past 6 months had changed him in ways that went beyond their professional success. The driven, sometimes ruthless CEO remained, but alongside that identity had emerged glimpses of the thoughtful boy he had once been. I have something for you, she said, reaching into her bag. She withdrew a small, carefully wrapped package. I found it when visiting my grandmother's sister in Rabat last week. Adam unwrapped the package to reveal a small, leather-bound notebook with faded Arabic script on its cover. It belonged to your grandmother, Layla explained. Apparently, she gave it to mine for safekeeping shortly before she died. It contains poems she had collected throughout her life, some famous, others her own compositions. Adam opened the book with reverent care, his recently improved Arabic allowing him to understand the elegant handwriting within. This is, he began, then stopped, momentarily overcome. A piece of your heritage, Layla completed softly. One that was never truly lost, just waiting to be rediscovered. They stood in companionable silence as the call to prayer echoed across the ancient city, a timeless sound that had provided the soundtrack to both their ancestral memories. Thank you, Adam said finally, not just for this, but for everything these past months have brought. His gaze met hers with unusual vulnerability. You've helped rebuild a foundation I didn't realize was missing. Layla nodded, understanding the depth behind his words. Their journey from employer and invisible employee to colleagues, and now something more complex, had unfolded with a symmetry that sometimes felt orchestrated by forces beyond their control. Your grandmother would be proud, she said, of the company you've built, yes, but more importantly, of the bridges you're creating. Adam smiled, the genuine expression that had become increasingly frequent rather than the calculated business smile she had once known. The Cultural Advisory Group's success speaks for itself. 4 new international partnerships, expanded market presence in previously resistant regions, and employee satisfaction metrics at an all-time high. Always the businessman, Layla teased gently. Not always, he countered, his tone shifting to something more personal. These 2 weeks in Morocco haven't been about business. It was true, After her family visit in Rabat, where Adam had charmed her skeptical brother and delighted her nieces and nephews with generous gifts and genuine attention, they had traveled to Marrakesh with no scheduled meetings or corporate agenda. Instead, they had explored the Medina, visited historic sites, and spent long evenings in conversation over mint tea and traditional cuisine. "My mother has already adopted you," Layla observed. "She's planning menus for your next visit." "She reminds me of my grandmother," Adam admitted. That same combination of practical wisdom and unexpected insight. As twilight deepened around them, the courtyard's hidden lights illuminated, casting a gentle glow across the ancient stones. Tomorrow they would return to the modern world of quarterly projections, board meetings, and global business strategies. But tonight existed in a timeless space between their shared past and uncertain future. "I received an offer from the International Cultural Exchange Foundation yesterday," Layla said, breaking the comfortable silence. "They want me to head their corporate advisory board." Adam's expression registered surprise, quickly masked. "That's a prestigious position." "It is," she agreed. "Global impact, significant influence on international business practices, considerable autonomy. Will you take it?" His tone was carefully neutral. Layla considered him thoughtfully. The question wasn't just about her career trajectory, but about the complex relationship that had developed between them, professional, personal, and increasingly difficult to categorize. "I haven't decided," she answered honestly. "There's still important work to be done at Khalid Industries." The company would survive without you," Adam said, though his expression suggested he was less certain about himself. "Perhaps," Layla acknowledged, "but surviving isn't the same as thriving." Adam moved to stand beside her at the courtyard's edge, both of them gazing up at the emerging stars in the North African sky. "A year ago, I was a billionaire CEO with a thriving company and an empty mansion," he said quietly. "Success by every conventional metric, and yet something fundamental was missing. I didn't even recognize the absence until that night you quoted Al-Mutanabi, and everything changed." "Oh, you shall know the worth of yourself by the worth of your ambition," Layla recited softly. "For one person considers himself a pebble, while another sees himself as precious as the stars." Adam completed the verse, my grandmother's favorite passage. The moment stretched between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. In the 6 months since Layla had accepted the position at Khalid Industries, their relationship had evolved through professional respect to friendship, and now hovered at the threshold of something deeper, complicated by their history, their professional connection, and the vastly different worlds they had inhabited for most of their lives. "Whatever you decide about the foundation offer," Adam said finally, "I want you to know that the door at Khalid Industries will always remain open, not just as an executive, but as a partner in the truest sense." The careful phrasing contained layers of meaning that Layla understood perfectly. This wasn't merely a job offer or even a business partnership, but something more profound, an invitation to continue building something together that transcended corporate structures. "I believe," she replied thoughtfully, "that my grandmother would say we're exactly where we're meant to be, even if it's not where either of us expected." Adam smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in the way that had become increasingly familiar. And what would Layla say? She considered the question, all that had led to this moment, from invisible maid to respected executive, from cultural erasure to celebrated heritage, from professional distance to profound connection. "That sometimes," she said, reaching for his hand in a gesture that bridged their final remaining boundary, "the most valuable things are found in unexpected places." As their fingers intertwined against the backdrop of the ancient Moroccan riad, Layla felt the completion of a circle that had begun generations before, one that connected past and present, east and west, visibility and recognition, a circle that promised to expand into a future neither could have imagined a year ago. In the distance, the lights of modern Marrakesh twinkled alongside the timeless silhouette of ancient minarets, a perfect metaphor for what they had built together and what still lay ahead.